Happy New Year and welcome to my winter decorating series. We're going to kick off with a makeover and we're going to work on the table and chairs. You find the kitchen this week in a half-dressed state, so Christmas has come out and winter decorating hasn't quite happened yet. That's going to happen next week. But first of all, we're going to get this table done and these chairs. I've been saying for such a long time that I want to repaint this table. Well, the time has finally arrived. I've had the table for many years over different houses, and when I built the kitchen back in 2018, I did this broken paint effect with greys, the same as on the chairs. And I bought lots of grey fabric, this lovely wool fabric, but I'm trying to reduce the amount of grey in the house. I don't mind the grey, but I just want it more as an accent colour. So I'm going to start with the chair pads, the seat pads. Take those off and I'm going to reupholster those first of all because the table is a great surface to work on. I've laid the pads out like this so I can take a photo and then I know which pad goes with which chair. Now this fabric I picked up last year. I got a huge bundle of it from the mills up in Lancashire in the north of England. I paid about £40 and I got metres and metres. Now I'm going to use my Tackwise staple gun and staples, which I got those off Amazon, so I'll link those below. It's a brilliant gun. I use a toffee hammer, an old screwdriver and some pliers, and sometimes I use this decorating tool when I'm reupholstering. So the first thing I do is use this old long screwdriver just to lever up the old staples to release the fabric. Now this is a seat pad that I have done several times, so there's no surprises here. I know exactly what's underneath. The pliers are great just for pulling out those old staples. And the decorator's tool is useful when you come across old pins, old tacks that they used to use to do the upholstery. With the staples, obviously much more modern, and the screwdriver is great to get underneath. Now, I'm not too worried that this fabric is slightly creased because as I'm putting the fabric on, I'm going to be pulling it really quite taut and all the creases will come out. Now, a good pair of sharp scissors is needed here, and I don't have a good pair of sharp scissors. So I use the tin foil trick just to keep these scissors going. Fold up a sheet of tin foil and then do several long snips all the way along the tin foil, and it sharpens your scissors every time. Now, I wouldn't advise this on expensive scissors, and quite frankly, I do need to invest in some, but it keeps me going. I love this staple gun because it is chargeable, so it's got some real power to it, some real kick. You're not having to squeeze hard or anything like that. And as you know, as you get older and your fingers get stiffer, you want to be able to keep on doing these projects. So any tools that can make my life easier, bring them on. There's a raw edge of fabric that won't fray. I just staple gun that straight on. But on the cut edges, I do like to fold them over and then staple because it stops any fraying and it looks neater. So therefore, it's good for my OCD. So all four sides are stapled down, and now it's time to do the corners, which obviously is always the trickiest bit. Over the years, I've tried different ways, but I find just pinching the material in and then bending it in on almost like a triangle coming in, and you have to spend a little bit of time backwards and forwards lifting up the pad, smoothing the fabric round, just so you get a really nice neat corner, and then staple that down with as many staples as you need. Use the hammer just to make sure that those staples are in nice and tight, and then any surplus material I just trim off with the scissors once I'm happy that everything is in the shape that I want it to be in. Reupholstering seat pads is just such a simple way of giving a refresh to a room, changing the look and feel. Now I've done one there, just 7 more to go. And there we go, 8 seat pads all finished, but just want to do one more thing to them. So I'm going to put an old towel on the table, and because this is a very light fabric, I'm going to protect it with this Scotch Guard. Again, it's an Amazon product, very easy to find, so I will link that one down below. I'm going to spray all 8 of the pads and then leave those to dry just for a couple of hours. Now, in the meantime, I need to do something with this rug. It is completely undersized for under the table. It's actually an offcut of stair carpet, and it was such an expensive carpet, and I loved it so much. I found a local company that would put the binding around it and make it into a rug for, I paid them about £25. Anyway, I think I have now found its new home in the cottage kitchen. I think it fits absolutely perfectly there, and the tone and texture just works so well with the cottage. Now, let's get back to that kitchen table. I'm going to go with chalk paint, old white, and then finish it all off with a matte lacquer. Now, I have a few tips and tricks on using this lacquer because it does behave differently to paint. But let's go and get some more appropriate clothing on. And you can tell I'm in business because the plaits are in and the painting slippers are on. Anybody else downgrade their slippers to painting slippers? Maybe just me? I'm checking the table for candle wax because we always have candle wax spillage. I'm also going to get underneath the table. It's a modern table and it comes apart in different sections. So I want to get a nice crisp edge on each one of these sections because I may need at a later stage to be using it as a much smaller table. I'm just using bits of cardboard underneath the legs because we're not going to make a huge mess, but we are going to be bringing paint and lacquer right the way down to the bottom. Now, chalk paint, like any other paint, performs better at room temperature. So if you store your paint somewhere quite cold, make sure you bring it up to temperature and then stir and stir and stir. You can't stir enough. It needs a really good stir. Now I'm going to roller this on, so I'm going to use tin foil in the paint tray purely for the fact that it makes clearing up a lot easier. I'm going with these microfiber rollers, which I absolutely love. And always remember with your rollers, rinse and spin before you begin. Takes away any loose fibers. I may use some brushes, so I've brought some in out of the garage so I don't have to keep going in backwards and forwards. But I'm definitely using this 1.5 inch brush, which will be handy for the cutting in, particularly around the base of the table. So the paint is at room temperature. It has been stirred within 1 inch of its life, and now I'm ready to begin. And whenever I'm painting a piece, I like to follow the direction, the grain of the wood. And with a table like this, it's quite easy to do it in sections. So that's the first coat done. I'll leave that for a couple of hours. I'll go back in with the second and I'll be able to pick up any of that show through. Now, I don't want to be wasting time washing brushes out, so it's cling film over the tray with the roller and brush inside and then into a carrier bag, or this is a bin liner, and it just stops the air getting to it and everything drying out. If you want a super smooth surface, then make sure you give it a very light sand in between coats. I've now done 2 really good passes over this and I'm happy with the coverage that it's given. I like the texture that the roller is giving, so I could have that completely smooth if I sanded it ever so lightly, but I don't want to. I do, however, want to do some heavy sanding on the side, so I've got my big marker out. Now, this has got an extraction unit on it, so there is very little dust around. If I was to have that sanding head completely flat on the surface, there wouldn't be a speck of dust anyway, because the extraction is fantastic. However, I'm using it on an angle to create this distressed effect. So there is a little bit of dust around. And because we're now going to go on with a lacquer, we don't want any dust. So I've got my good old trusty Little Henry out. Little Henry's wonderful because he's really good for my hands because he's not terribly heavy. I'll link him below. When I was doing the distressing, I pushed the leaves of the table together just to make sure I was happy with the finish. Now that I am, I've pulled those back out so I can vacuum and then I can start the lacquer process. Now, lacquer can be a bit of a tricky dicky, so I'm going to give you a few tips, a few pointers. The first coat you should always water down, but no more than 10%. So this much water would water down by 10% this whole can, which obviously we're not going to be using all of that. Now, I am going to be rollering this. Normally you would use a foam roller, but I'm loving this microfiber at the moment, so I'm going to run with that. And as always, I am going to be lining my tray because I like to keep my clear up to an absolute minimum. And the lacquer, if you have had it stood around for a while, turn it upside down for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I've had this upside down every which way. Don't shake because you will get bubbles and you do not want bubbles in your lacquer. You want to stir and you want to really stir. Have I mentioned stirring? You need to keep on stirring because this contains flattening agents and you want them to be equally dispersed all the way through. Keep stirring. Did I mention stirring? I'm sure I mentioned stirring. I'm only going to add a little bit of water and then pour in my lacquer and then mix that together in the tray. Remember, that little bit of water there would do the whole can. So less than 10%, 10% absolute maximum if it's really warm. And remember, what do we do with our rollers? We rinse and spin before we begin. I'm going to apply 2 thin, even coats. It doesn't really like being back worked, this, so don't be tempted to get so far along and then come back and rework it. Just work in sections and there's no need to sand in between the coats. If you're using a dark coloured paint, then you can sometimes get clouding. So what I would suggest is that you use a small amount of your paint colour into the lacquer and that will stop any clouding. So why am I using lacquer and not my normal wax? Well, this gives a much tougher finish. It's an exterior product and it can be used in bathrooms. Now let's go and have a change of scene while that lacquer is drying. I've got my marker back outside. I've got an 80 grit on it and I am going over the chairs. I've decided I am not going to paint the chairs. I love this distressed finish. And so I'm going to take these back right the way back to the wood, but leave odd bits of paint on them. I want to really try and work down that grey top coat that I did a few years ago. So I want to knock that back and let the natural wood show through, and as I say, bits of the old paint as well. Fortunately, most of the chairs that I've painted in the past have had a cream colour underneath or a white, and so that's fine for that colour to show through. However, these were black. I sprayed them black and I painted them so well that they're just not chipping. They're really not looking good. So I'm going to push on doing the chairs that I know that have got that nice light neutral colour that I like underneath, and I will think about how I will solve the problem. I'm still thinking, yep, the light has gone, but I feel a cunning plan coming on. The table has been left to dry overnight, so it's fine to put back together. I wouldn't put anything heavy on it for a little while yet because it needs to go through its curing process. The chairs have all been sanded and had a good wash down, so time to get those back into the kitchen. Four seat pads left over. What is going on? Well, my cunning plan involved switching chairs around. So these were the chairs that were originally sprayed black in my dining room at my last home that weren't going to sand down well. So what I did was switch them with 4 chairs that were out on the veranda. I did them on my summer porch makeover, and they were the same sort of effect. So I've just given them another blow over with the sander just to give them a really good clean up. The seat pads were upholstered in exactly the same fabric, so it's basically switcheroo time. This is one of the big benefits of having the same colour palette running throughout your whole home. So you can make each room look different, but if you keep the same base colours, it means that all your furniture and your accessories can be switched around. So what do you think, Bertie? Was that a good job? High five. The furry supervisor gives it the paw of approval. Now, normally at this stage, I'd be decorating the table and giving you all those lovely end shots with it all beautifully styled, but I want it to harden off for a few days. So I'd love for you to join me next week when we're going to go full on winter styling in the whole of the kitchen, and we will be doing the table as well. So that was episode 1 of my new winter decorating series. There's going to be lots of episodes to come. Lots of styling, tips, tricks, and lots of makeovers. Till next time, take care, and thanks so much for watching.